Okay. You should all receive the webinars being recorded box. So, okay, welcome everyone. It's nice to see people. Very excited actually about today's webinar. I had the opportunity in May during the CDI meeting to hear part of the talk. There were a couple talks given by Fran Lightsome and Viv Hutchinson about the efforts happening at USGS to develop a roadmap around FAIR. It's really exciting work. Really a lot of leadership coming out of USGS around data, both for their intramural researchers, but also for the broader USGS and geoscience community. So it's really exciting what's happening. And I often look to USGS when I have to refer people for training materials, really good resources there. And so I'm really pleased to introduce Viv Hutchinson today. I've known Viv since I was at Illinois early in my data curation days, and had the opportunity to invite Viv to come in and talk about data and the early work they were doing on research data management there. She's been a leader a long time. So Viv is a branch chief for data science management in the Core Science Analytics Synthesis and Libraries program at the US Geological Survey, USGS. Her team is primarily dedicated to developing and maintaining a suite of enterprise-wide data management tools, promoting best practices that support USGS scientists for long-term management of scientific data, and leading the community to practice around data integration. So tremendous work happening in that space as we're moving toward needing to have AI-ready data. I will note, I'll leave out her some of the personal notes she makes here. You can see some more of her bio on the GoFair US website. But I will note that Viv comes out of the LIS community. She's got a Master of Library Science from Maryland, and so as most of you know, that the LIS and archival world is near and dear to me. So, okay, without further ado, I turn it over to Viv. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. Let me see if I can get my screen shared properly. Did I do it? Are you seeing the screen okay?
Yes, you're up. Yep, you're great.
Okay, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, well, thanks so much for the lovely introduction and also for reminding me where we met, Melissa. It's been a little while, for sure. That's fun. I was supposed to present with Fran Lightsome this morning, but she is having some East Coast of the US difficulty with power today. She's having a power outage. I think there was a big storm yesterday. So anyway, you just have me today. But I will present this work that we've done in the US Geological Survey for developing a roadmap for enabling fair data. And the rest of our team includes Linda DeBrewer and Dave Gavani and Natalie Latish and Wade Bishop and Shelley Stahl. So I like to mention those names. A lot of work has gone into this from those people, helping Fran and I to get this project underway. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So the US Geological Survey, just for a quick overview, it's a bureau within the United States Department of the Interior, focused on the natural sciences. So that includes water and biology, energy and minerals, and hazards. And so our mission is to provide unbiased, reliable scientific research to other scientists and decision makers and policy makers and the public. So that's like the briefest introduction you'll ever have to USGS. In 2006, USGS developed what we call fundamental science practices. And those are a set of policies, guidance, and sort of operational principles for performing USGS science. And they're governed by an advisory council called the FSPAC, which is the Fundamental Science Practices Advisory Council, which is comprised of representation of people across all of the USGS mission areas, and it's led by senior executive leaders. And so in our current fundamental science practices related to data, we have a number of actions that are required from our scientists. that include project data management plans, public release of scientific data that supports conclusions in a publication, and those need to be in machine readable, non-proprietary formats. Robust granular metadata records in standard machine readable formats. And the data must be in a trusted digital repository with a digital object identifier, which are included in the metadata. And the metadata has to be submitted to a comprehensive public data catalog that we maintain. And so much of the alignment with the FAIR principles has resulted from recent federal policies in the United States. And those include the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act that just came out in 2018. There was a 2013 Office of Science and Technology policy memo that was called Increasing Access to the Results of Federally Funded Scientific Research. There was also a 2013 federal government sort of open and machine readable government information policies directive, which actually resulted in a 2016 USGS public access plan. And that coordinated those 4 fundamental science practices survey manual chapters that are focused on data management. So that's a little bit of how we got here. The characteristics of FAIR scientific products are well defined, but it's a little less clear sort of how to facilitate the consistency of the production and maintenance of FAIR data and other scientific products across the USGS. Our data are produced by hundreds of research projects, and they're distributed across 65 science centers in 7 regions in the US. And after our data are approved for release, they're managed in one of sort of almost 33 USGS repositories and online data systems that have been around for a long time, most of them. And so to realize the USGS vision for automated, predictive, integrated science that provides timely and actionable results, the Bureau has to provide knowledge and support services and develop skills and infrastructure and culture that enables uniform adoption of consistent methods to align our digital research products with FAIR data principles. And so the USGS FAIR Roadmap was funded to address that challenge. And let me get to the next slide. Yeah, so USGS has a community of practice for data management called the Community for Data Integration. And in 2019, the community funded the FAIR Roadmap project, basically to improve USGS alignment with FAIR principles through its policies and practices and infrastructure. And the project convened a broadly representative workshop and produced a roadmap to enable FAIR at USGS. So the FAIR roadmap includes an examination of the current state of USGS fairness, identifies critical gaps in that, and recommends steps to improve fairness of USGS data. And so this was achieved in a number of ways by surveying data producers, analyzing research projects that integrate data, collecting USGS perspectives at a workshop, and then publishing a report that includes 88 recommendations for the USGS. And the roadmap recommendations have been grouped into 9 strategies. The strategies are then grouped into 3 action areas. And they don't quite match the Go FAIR pillars, but although the same basic activities are included, we just thematically grouped them in a different way as we were working on the roadmap. And so the strategies that focus on enabling improvements to individual data products focus on things like persistent identifiers, identify research products, including physical samples for automated discovery and access. Another strategy is metadata or machine actionable to improve data discovery and reuse. And the third is research methods generate interoperable and reusable data. And so the strategy is recommending administrative activities to support an organizational culture that values FAIR, include employee incentives, improve the production of FAIR-aligned data. That research, development, and participation in professional communities improve capabilities to align with FAIR principles. And culture change achieved through knowledge exchange encourages activities and techniques that improve alignment with FAIR. And then the last strategy that will provide or improve infrastructure include these three. Repositories and data systems provide discovery and access through unified compatible methods. Vocabulary services improve discovery and evaluation of fitness for use. And policy requirements improve consistency of products. So that is kind of how we laid out the roadmap. And so now I'll dig into a few of the details just to kind of give you some examples. In USGS, the Fundamental Science Practices Advisory Committee, this FSPAC, has responsibility for updating data release policies that fit in sort of the Go Change pillar. And the high priority roadmap recommendations for policy change address persistent identifiers, curation methods in USGS repositories and streamlining those, a machine actionable catalog of approved vocabularies and ontologies and use of these for metadata, data usage licenses in metadata, and release of software. And the USGS FAIR roadmap takes a broad view of training, especially including different ways of offering information to employees. And so, we were actually thinking that Go FAIR would actually be a very welcome partner in sort of helping us with some of this training. So some of this includes community standards for metadata, including consistent ways of expressing important information, are recommended to be communicated through our community for data integration. And we have a metadata reviewers community of practice within that. And we thought information about modern research practices that create interoperable data is recommended as a topic of training, and also by providing sort of a checklist summaries for use in fieldwork. And procedures for compliance with new policies would be developed and distributed by the FSPAC. And repository procedures and standards would be communicated through information or training offered by USGS repository managers, offered to repository managers, excuse me. And then we thought about basic information about our fundamental science practices, FAIR, and the role of data managers would be offered through formal training presented by our Office of Employee Development and on our USGS data management website and through our community for data integration. And then new or detailed information about best practices for producing FAIR data would be obtained through engagement with outside groups like Go FAIR and RDA and OGC, for example. So this is just kind of an example of how we were thinking through what training looks like in our organization. And then the last one here that we tried to align a little bit here for this presentation with the last pillar of Go FAIR is the Go Build pillar. Because the diversity of scientific research methods in the USGS, our activities that implement standards and new technologies can serve as test beds for a larger research community. And so the roadmap recommends implementation of standards and tools for vocabulary services, for applying persistent identifiers, for translating metadata standards, for integrated data stores in the cloud, and for federated search and access of repositories and online databases, ways we can improve all of that. And the USGS is a mature organization. It provides employee incentives through a well-defined institutional promotion and performance management system. But the roadmap also recommends looking into ways to provide incentives to scientists for specific changes in research activities that produce interoperable and reusable data. And so this is an area that we think we could benefit from the larger perspective of Go FAIR to help us to achieve some of that. And then the last thing here is next steps. So what is happening here? We are proposing these next steps as our FAIR roadmap team. And those are to finish publishing our roadmap to FAIR data as an open file report in the USGS. That's just simply indicating that it'll be published by the USGS, certain type of report series. And it's currently in management review. So that document is ready to be published, but it is being reviewed by upper management in the USGS. Also, making materials available through our community for data integration to support FAIR working groups. So groups that'll be concentrating on these recommendations and how we can implement them in USGS. Developing a FAIR knowledge base for USGS, so an easy place to go to find information about how to make a data set more fair, for example. And then establishing a FAIR coordination council to guide implementation. We have found in the past that it really helps to have sort of a coordinating committee and then distributing work and kind of having people report back how the progress is going. And then lastly, just visualizing and tracking our progress and figuring out how to do that. We've shared our recommendations. We put them in sort of a Tableau visualization tool to sort of be able to say, oh, these ones are complete, or we're still working on these, or these haven't been started, that type of thing. So that'll be available as well once the roadmap is published. And that is what I have, Melissa. So I think we're ready for questions and discussion.
Great. Yes, Q&A time. I'm going to propose, so the way that this is split up now, please folks use, I think you have access to the chat, but maybe not. So please feel free to use the Q&A for questions. We might figure out a way to bring you over the rest of the panelists for discussion. And then, so I'm going to leave the recording on for questions and then potentially turn off the recording during discussion so we may chat freely amongst ourselves. Okay, I am seeing being transferred over to panelists, so that's great. Thank you, Christine, for that. And I do not see any questions at the moment in here. Let me see if I can also move people over myself. So let me do that.
Well, and maybe while you're doing
bear with us, Viv, we're gonna...
I just wanted to make a comment and thank you for that presentation. Even though we've been working together, our offices, I had no idea of the breadth of this roadmap, and definitely see a lot of places where we could join forces.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, the roadmap is a work in progress, but it's fairly close to at least being, published and on paper. It's definitely a big undertaking. It took us, like, we did that workshop in late 2019, and it took us about a year, once a week meeting, to try to get all of the recommendations organized in a way that made sense. So anyway, it's definitely a process for sure, and sort of figure out how to make FAIR work in a particular organization.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like we have a question from Katie. We'll invite Katie to turn on your camera and unmute yourself if you want, and feel free to ask the question.
Hey, sorry, I'm dealing with laptop grumpiness this morning. This was so great. I'm sorry I can't turn my video on. My laptop is refusing.
That's okay.
But this was so wonderful. I wondered if you could talk a little more about how you were able to get administrative buy-in or upper management buy-in. Like when you talked about using the incentives, that's certainly something at Oak Ridge that would be, I would love to know more about.
Oh yeah, well, it's a little bit of a tricky thing, right? You have to engage upper leadership at certain points, and then re-engage them later on, and then sort of refine based on feedback from them. So how this worked out was our community for data integration has a couple of executive sponsors in USGS, and that's Kevin Gallagher and Timothy Quinn. And so they're both on the executive leadership team, and they sponsor the entire CDI. So when Fran and I entered this proposal in for consideration by the CDI, it went through a whole bunch of sort of approval processes, if you will. And some of those are from the community itself. And then there's a panel, and in the end, these longer proposals are sort of listed out, and the executive sponsors come in and take a look, and they have sort of their say in the process. And so it made it through all of those. And so they were very well aware of this proposal for a fair roadmap, and they knew about it, and they, and so we briefed them from time to time. In the last CDI meeting, as Melissa was mentioning, we did do a presentation there and kind of where we were on things. And so the executive sponsors are sort of milling around in those presentations as well. But anyway, it's now time for us to revisit that with upper management in USGS. And so the publication itself, the reason I said it's in management review is that's literally gone through all of the peer review process. We have bureau approving officials that also look at final copies of manuscripts before they get published. That has been approved. But there was a recommendation to revisit our executive leadership team because we were making so many recommendations for things in the USGS. So that's where we are. So we will present this information back again to our executive leaders, see what kind of feedback they have and any changes that they want to make. And before we kind of hit the publication status and hit the ground running in terms of implementation. So hopefully that answers your question. There's quite a bit, that goes on, I think, in terms of balancing, what the community comes up with and how executive leadership would like to pursue what happens to that feedback. So.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. It's a great question.
I see another question. Nancy, you're welcome to turn on your mic or join, but I can read your question for you if you'd like.
I can read it. I can't get the video started.
No worries.
Go ahead and ask the question. Hi, Viv. Yeah, I was just listening as I was listening to the roadmap. It's amazingly comprehensive. It looks like you've thought about all kinds of ways to both make sure it goes through the organization and also provide incentives. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the kinds of incentives you were thinking of for the researchers, particularly. In terms of workflow, for instance, that'd be interesting to see how you can incentivize people to change that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, it's actually a great question. And that's why that particular slide was like, ideas from the Go Fair community would be helpful as well, because some of the things that we had listed out were more emphasis on credit for doing these types of data management things that need to happen in order for data to be more fair. So things like that, or incorporating, small changes into their scientific workflow from the very beginning that would then enable more reusable data and that kind of thing as we get to the end of the process for the research study or whatever. Right now, we have some cultural change moving towards respecting the data product a little bit more in our research grade evaluation process, which is those are RGE scientists, are the scientists that are evaluated on their work and how much impact it has in the scientific community. And so they're mainly, or have been in the past, mainly focused on the publication. And now that we have these data policies and all of these scientists are working really hard to ensure that their data are released. And I had, some of those requirements for release, like digital object identifiers and good metadata and that kind of thing. We feel like they need to have credit for that. So that was one of the things that we feel like if data rose, it probably will never rise to the equal, with the publication, but if it rose up enough that was recognized in those evaluations more, it incentivizes them, I think, to do an even better job in getting data to be more fair.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it all sounds like it's in a way kind of similar to what happens in academic environments where, hopefully the researchers, the faculty members are getting more credit for the work that they're doing for the data creation in terms of the tenure process and so on. So it sounds like that's kind of an equivalent approach,
is.
right? Yeah, which is great.
Exactly,
Yeah,
equivalent approach for sure.
great.
So yeah, so that's one of them, but I think there could probably be other incentives. And it's just a matter of sort of figuring out sort of what those are and how to implement those without, you know, the threat of changing how the research process is done to an individual scientist, right? Like some of this has to be done kind of carefully because they can't disrupt everything they're doing.
Right, right.
So
Yeah, great.
anyway,
Thank you.
yeah, open to thoughts for
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
Right. You know, so at that CDI meeting, there was some discussion after your presentation about, and maybe during one of the other sessions about in fact, the review process, the annual review process. But the tone of it was, hey, if people aren't actually doing some of these, you know, good data management practices, you know, so that the idea of good data management or good data stewardship gets added in as a component to the annual review. And so people would be, you know, graded, if you will, on that. But I think today, hearing it, if we talk about it in the positive, you know, that it becomes, data management becomes one of those areas that, you know, you can shine on.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the review process, I think that's really great. I haven't heard about this really at other agencies being picked up as a way to sort of assess, you know, actual work requirements or tasks. But before the webinar started, Viv and I were talking a little bit about this gap with FAIR and being able to engage researchers directly, the domain researchers directly, that, you know, we're certainly getting a lot of traction in the repository community, in the data librarians or steward community, some of the informatics communities, but the people that are focused primarily on the domain science, it's a little bit hard to get them engaged around FAIR. And I mean, my view is I think people are still honestly really struggling with the regulatory issues on what they have to do with their data for reporting and publishing things. So anyway, I do think this place of how do we engage the domain scientists better and more easily around helping them sort of do things that end up being fair, whether they call it fair or not, I think is a great opportunity.
Well, I think it's incredibly important also to show impact, right? So you've done all of this work on your data to make it more fair. How does that impact the research community that you're then supplying your data to? And we've done a little bit of that work trying to say, you know, we see that, you know, DOIs and digital object identifiers for data are showing up in publications as references, right? So the data has been used in the conclusions some publication outside of their own has come to. And so that's really impactful. That's starting to gain, I think, credibility in the science community for sure. Like, oh, you know, if I do these things, then there is a result on the other end that's beneficial to me and the science community. So
that's great. Any other questions while we're still here? So what I'm going to do, if it's okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Go ahead.
Melissa.
Go ahead, Chris.
I don't know if you saw, yeah. So Viv, I'm Chris Erdman. Shelley Stahl has mentioned this report, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. But I work with her at AGU, and it's funny, you know, the thing of the statement about FAIR. Researchers, it sort of resonates with them. In fact, we get a lot of messages about that saying, I understand FAIR and I'm all for it. And then it's all the rubber that hits the road of like, how do I make this, you know, very large data fair? And, you know, what do I need to exactly share? And I think we still have some ways to go as far as like, you know, those kind of conversations, because, you know, in some ways, you know, I know we point to repositories, but some of them are not capable, you know, a lot of them are not capable for some of the data that's being shared. But my question, that comment got me going, because I do see that often. I see a researcher saying, I understand FAIR, but
yeah.
But I think my question is, I wonder if your work, because Nancy asked about incentives, and I'm wondering, because we see varying degrees of policies from journals about data, software sharing, and we do have like authors deciding to go to another journal because they're more lax in that case, or the standards are a little bit more lax. And so I'm wondering, in the case of your roadmap and the work you're doing, will what is this, like the carrot or the stick, or both, or will you be sort of tracking that to see which journals really are sort of compliant with what we want to do, and sort of guiding your authors to those journals?
No, that's a great question. I think in the case of USGS, because it's a federal government US organization, right? The internal policies at USGS kind of dictates like this is all going to happen anyway. And then once it goes to the journal, then it's great that the journal supports that or isn't quite there in terms of supporting it, because they've already done it on the USGS side, if that makes sense. So there's certain policies in place that show how they need to release their data and kind of what that needs to look like. And we can use those as a means for saying, okay, we've got these policies. Here's our, kind of official guidance on how to do some of this stuff. And then it's already kind of verified before it goes, to the journal in the first place. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of, I think, how things are being approached from our perspective, just because those policies are in place already.
No, it makes sense to not to sort of really be before that process, even if if journals, they don't necessarily have these policies, but I'm not even sure if all the journals sort of have availability statement sections and those sort of capabilities for referencing or citing data or software. But yeah.
No, actually, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. So we have to keep working it from all the different angles, right? Like in the organizations, in the publishing world, in the repository world, et cetera, for sure. There's a lot of work to do, but you're right. I mean, I do think people are sort of embracing it and asking those good questions about how do I do a better job doing this, So hopefully some of these things like roadmaps will help get us there faster.
Thanks.
Great points. Yeah.
Well, I think as Melissa suggested, we could stop the recording and potentially close the webinar unless there are other questions.